大家提出的问题。今年上半年，在以习近平同志为核心的党中央坚强领导下，我国高效统筹疫情防控与社会发展，着力稳定宏观经济大盘，外贸进出口实现稳步增长。据海关统计，今年上半年，我国货物贸易进出口总值19.8万亿元人民币，同比增长9.4%，其中出口11.14万亿元，增长13.2%，进口8.66万亿元，增长4.8%。具体分析主要有5个方面的特点：一是5、6月份外贸增速明显回升。5月份以来，随着国内疫情防控形势总体向好，各项稳增长政策效应逐渐显现，外贸企业复工复产有序推进，特别是长三角等地区进出口快速恢复，带动全国外贸整体增速明显回升。5月份，我国外贸进出口同比增长9.5%，增速较4月份加快了9.4个百分点。6月份增速
growth rate further increased to 14.3% in June. Second, proportion of general trade continued to increase. In the first half of this year, general trade was 12.71 trillion yuan, growing by 13.1%, accounting for 64.2% of our total trade, recording a 2.1 percentage point increase. Export was 7.16 trillion, up by 19%. Import 5.55 trillion, up by 6.5%. At the same time, processing trade was 4.02 trillion, up by 3.2%. Third, trade with major partners continued to grow. In the first half of this year, our trade with ASEAN, the EU, and the United States stood at 2.95 trillion, 2.71 trillion, and 2.47 trillion respectively, increasing 10.6%, 7.5%, and 11.7% respectively. Meanwhile, our trade with Belt and Road partner countries and with RCEP members increased by 17.8% and 5.6% respectively. Fourth, business vitality of trade-related entities has been further unleashed. In the first half of this year, there are 506,000 enterprises that are active in trade, increasing by 5.5% year-on-year. 425,000 of them are private companies, up by 6.9%. They recorded 9.82 trillion yuan of trade, increasing by 13.6%, accounting for 49.6% of our total trade, 1.9 percentage points higher year-on-year. Foreign invested companies registered 6.75 trillion of import and export, up by 2.1%. The number for SOEs was 3.2 trillion, up by 15.2%. Fifth, trade of major products grew steadily. In the first half of this year, trade of electromechanical products was 9.72 trillion yuan, up by 4.2%, accounting for 49.1% of our total trade. Trade of agricultural products was 1.04 trillion, up by 9.3%, accounting for 5.2% of our total trade. Export of labor-intensive products was 1.99 trillion, increasing by 13.5%, accounting for 17.8% of our total export. import of crude oil, natural gas, and coal, among other energy products, totaled 1.48 trillion, up by 53.1%, accounting for 17.1% of our total import. In the first half of this year, trade was resilient. We have kicked off to a good start in the first quarter. May, we had a major turnaround in May, laying a solid foundation for the rebound of trade of this year. The COVID situation and the international dynamics are becoming more complex. We are still facing uncertainties and instabilities in our foreign trade. We are still facing pressure to stabilize it and improve its quality. We also need to see that we have a resilient economy and the economy is turning for the better. We have sound fundamentals. As we are delivering on the package of stabilizing policies and as we are resuming work in production, trade is expected to grow steadily. Going forward, the customs will act on the guidance of Xi Jinping thought on socialism with Chinese characteristics for a new era. We will implement the decisions of the 19th CPC National Congress, act on the guidance of General Secretary Xi Jinping to strike a balance between economic development, COVID control, and coordinate economic growth with our efforts to stem COVID-19. We will strengthen oversight, improve services, and endeavor to improve the quality of trade and lay a solid foundation for the successful convening of the 20th National Congress. Now, I would like to take your questions. Now the floor is open. Thank you. Since the beginning of this year, we have rolled out a set of policies to stabilize trade. What are your measures as the administration to stabilize trade? What are the impacts?
Thank you for the question. This year, following the spirit of the Central Working Conference on Economy and the National Virtual Meeting on Stabilizing the Economy, and in pursuant with the State Council's instructions on stabilizing and upgrading foreign trade, the administration introduced 10 measures to stabilize and upgrade foreign trade and a number of measures to further support businesses and cutting costs. Local customs authorities also introduced specific measures in light of local conditions and businesses' needs. There are 854 such specific steps to fully support the growth of foreign trade. Let me list some of the major measures. First, providing solid guarantee for smooth logistics. We piloted the model of zero delay loading and unloading nationwide. On the basis of the pilot programs in Shanghai and Chongqing, we conducted new pilots of confirmation upon departure in Nanjing, Hangzhou, and Ningbo. We carried out whole process monitoring of COVID vaccines clearance. Relevant documents were reviewed in advance and COVID vaccines can get passed without opening the package or waiting. We also set up green lanes for perishable agricultural produce. Second, ensuring stable industrial and supply chains. We provided effective support for the customs clearance for whitelisted companies important for the industrial and supply chains. We diversified and facilitated grain import. and signed the protocol for the import of corn from Myanmar, soybean from Malawi, corn and peanut from Brazil. We promoted the export of quality agricultural produce from RCEP countries to China, supported the import of commodities such as iron ore and cotton to ensure sufficient domestic supply. Third, we have taken out multi-pronged measures to stabilize market entities. 73.7 thousand import food producers were registered in China. The time needed for record filing were cut short. 23.5 thousand enterprises filed their record. The review for the IPR protection application were accelerated. 10.7 thousand new applications were filed, up by 58%. Domestic sale tax suspension interest charge was exempted for companies, benefiting 14.6 thousand such companies. Fourth is improving business environment in port cities. We carried out special campaign to facilitate cross-border trade in 10 cities of 8 provinces. We worked with relevant departments to carry out 10 measures to facilitate cross-border trade. We continued to advance single-window building to ensure faster clearance. We continued to advance reform of government functions and guided 90,000 companies to file their documents with one certificate combining multiple documents. We also carried out the integrated reform in a number of areas to further facilitate trade. Looking ahead, the customs authorities will continue to implement the important instructions of effective COVID response, stable economy, and secure development, coordinate economic and social development and COVID response. We will continue to implement relevant policies for stable growth and continue to improve foreign trade and upgrade foreign trade. Thank you. Next question. CCTV. Director General, you mentioned that we managed steady growth of import and export in the first half of this year. So what are the major factors supporting such growth? And how can we sustain such a growth momentum, and what is your prospect? Thank you for the question. In the first half of this year, our foreign trade sustained steady growth, with steady growth of foreign trade, which reached 19.8 trillion yuan, a positive growth for 8 consecutive quarters. Such growth contributed to stability of macroeconomic growth. We believe that the major factors underpinning such growth are as follows. First is relatively stable external demand. This year, despite rising external risks and challenges posed by COVID-19 and the Ukraine crisis, generally speaking, global economic recovery has maintained, and the external demand remains stable. In the first half of this year, export of electrical appliances, integrated circuits, and automobiles grew by 24.8%, 16.4%, and 51.1% respectively. The export of garments, plastic products, and shoes grew by 10.8%, 14.9%, and 31.4% respectively. Second is sufficient potential of domestic production demand. This year, Facing the complex and challenging external environment and the downward pressure brought by domestic COVID situation, the CPC Central Leadership coordinated COVID response and economic and social development and actively secured stable macroeconomy. Therefore, domestic production demand gradually recovered and has effectively supported import growth. In the first half of this year, import of copper, basic organic chemicals, and integrated circuits registered a growth of 16.2%, 7.9%, and 5.15% respectively. Third, the fast recovery of foreign trade in a number of places stabilized the fundamentals for foreign trade. This year, the Yangtze River Delta, the Pearl River Delta, and the northeastern part of China saw sporadic outbreaks. As a result, foreign trade in those places were affected. Yet, they managed to rapidly overcome the impact and bring monthly growth back to the positive territory. This shows the strong resilience of those places and also help consolidate the fundamentals for the stable growth of foreign trade nationwide. In May, the Yangtze River Delta, the Pearl River Delta, and the northeastern part of China saw year-on-year growth of 5.8%, 2.8%, and 12.2% in foreign trade. And in June, growth went further up to 14.9%, 6.4%, and 12.8% respectively. Force market entities was effectively energized. The implementation of the packaged policy measures for stable growth and the accelerated efforts to stabilize and upgrade foreign trade has effectively energized market entities. In the first half of this year, the number of companies with sound foreign trade performance was up by 5.5%. The import and export of all types of foreign trade entities registered growth, among which privately owned companies saw a growth of 13.6%, 4.2 percentage points higher than overall growth, and contributing 6.5 percentage points to overall foreign trade nationwide. Besides, the high prices of commodities to some extent also resulted in rising imports. In the first half of this year, the CRB commodity index was up by 25%. In this context, the average import price of crude oil, natural gas, and coal rise notably, which also pushed up the overall import value. As for the future prospects, I've mentioned that our foreign trade continues to face some uncertainties and destabilizing factors, yet there are also many favorable factors. So we believe that we have a solid foundation to improve and upgrade foreign trade. Thank you. Next question. Phoenix TV. You mentioned that there are fast rebounds of exports and imports in the Yangtze River Delta region, and what are the work of the customs authorities in this regard?
Thank you for your question. Our statistics show that in the first half of this year, the 3 provinces and 1 municipality in the Yangtze River Delta region registered 7.14 trillion of trade, increasing by 9.3%. Trade in June was 1.39 trillion, up by 14.9%, 0.6 percentage points higher than the overall level across the country, contributing to nearly 40% of trade across the country. In June, trade in Anhui, Jiangsu, and Zhejiang increased by 19.7%, 17.5% and 16% respectively. 5.4, 3.2, and 1.7 percentage points higher than the nationwide average. The most hard-hit city of Shanghai registered positive growth of trade in June, recording 9.6% year-on-year increase and 35.6% growth month-on-month. We at the Customs are acting on the decisions of the CPC Central Committee and the State Council. We have established a task force to coordinate efforts and support and ensure the smooth flow of customs clearance in order to ensure and facilitate trade growth in the region. First, frontline human resources are guaranteed on a priority basis. For instance, in Shanghai, the customs, upon exercising district-based control in the city, have sent working groups to ports and airports. Over 1,300 staff members have stayed on duty, seeing to it that business is conducted as usual and help maintain operational efficiency at the ports in Shanghai. Second, guide companies on fast-tracking customs clearance. Livelihood supplies such as grain, meat, natural gas were inspected and approved as a priority. Emergency supplies such as medical supplies, first aid equipment, and relevant components are facilitated. We have instructed companies to use online appointment, escort-free inspection in order to be processed more quickly. Coordinating mechanism to ensure smooth clearance was established. Targeted measures were taken to facilitate flow of cross-border goods. Green lanes were set up for key supplies. Information sharing platform was set up. All these are efforts to facilitate rapid clearance at the ports in Shanghai. Third, actively facilitate smooth logistics. We have scaled up the oversight model on direct transfer of goods between seaborne and riverborne ships, facilitate much-needed goods clearance. At eligible ports, we have advanced zero-delay loading and unloading of goods. We have improved and upgraded the waterborne logistics oversight mechanism in the Yangtze River Delta region. We have supported expanding the pilot program of confirmation upon set-off in order to increase the efficiency of waterborne logistics. We have supported companies to open fast clearance business on railways to improve and enhance rail-based logistics. Fourth, we have coordinated efforts to respond to companies' concerns. Long-term mechanisms are established to serve companies. We have formulated a wide list to ensure smooth clearance of trade goods in order to help companies meet difficulties and ensure stability of industrial and supply chains. Going forward, we at the Customs will act on the decisions of the State Council, guarantee the smooth flow of logistics, and support companies in resumption of work and production. Thank you. Next question, please.
You've been speaking a lot about what you've done domestically to help exports. Can you speak a bit about what you see for overseas demand? If you look at Europe and America, it seems like there's more talk of recession and demand is falling. Companies like Walmart have higher and higher inventories. What is your expectation for export demand in the second half of this year? And secondly, what is your estimate for export growth if you discount price effects? So excluding rising prices for exports, how much would exports have grown? Thank you.
请翻译一下。
彭博新闻记者，您刚刚已经大量的谈到了海关总署在国内方面就进出口采取了哪些举措。我的问题主要是关于海外需求。正如我们现在看到的，欧美等多国正在面临衰退风险，国外需求有所下降。您对未来一年国外需求的增长怎么看？第二个问题是，如果我们不考虑价格变化的因素，您如何看待未来出口方面的增长前景？谢谢。As I said just now, recovery globally is relatively.
Thank you for the question. As I said just now, recovery globally is relatively stable. This is our assessment. This means broad market opportunities for China's exports. In the second half of this year, we think that there are indeed uncertainties and instabilities,
resumption of work of Chinese companies,
but our domestic demand, our economic growth, and the rapid resumption of work of Chinese companies, we are still very optimistic of our export in the second half of this year. We think in the second half, trade will register steady growth. Thank you. In the first half of this year, how is our trade with other BRICS countries? What has the customs in the first half of this year? How is our trade with other BRICS countries? What has the customs authorities done? Thank you. How do you assess the future prospect of our trade with other BRICS countries? China just hosted the 14th summit. As the BRICS rotating, I will briefly talk about our trade with other BRICS countries. Since the 2009 BRICS summit, our trade with other BRICS countries has been getting closer. Total trade shot up from 960.2 billion to 3.17 trillion RMB yuan, averaging an annual rate of 10.5%. In the first half of this year, trade with other BRICS countries totaled 1.64 trillion yuan, increasing by 14.1% year-on-year, 4.7 percentage points higher than overall trade growth nationwide. Export was 817.18 billion, increasing by 20.6%. Import 825.82 billion, up by 8.3%. There are a number of highlights. First, the share of trade with BRICS countries steadily increased. In the first half of this year, trade with other BRICS countries accounted for 8.3% of our total trade. That is 0.2 percentage points higher than 2021 and 1.9 percentage points higher than 2009. Second, import of energy and agricultural products has been rising fairly quickly. In the first half of this year, we imported in total from other BRICS countries 298.98 billion worth of energy products, up by 53.3%. This marks 36.2% of our total import from BRICS countries. We imported agricultural products of 185.46 billion, increasing by 15.6%, accounting for 22.5%. Third, export of electromechanical products accounts for more than half, and export of new energy products increased substantially. In the first half of this year, we exported 455.5 billion yuan of electromechanical products to other BRICS countries, increasing by 16.2%, accounting for 55.7% of our total export to other BRICS countries, in particular solar cell, lithium-ion battery, among other new energy products, register 99.7 and 67.3% respectively in export. Meanwhile, export of labor-intensive products was 106.65 billion, up by 7.3%. Let me also talk about what we at the Customs Administration have done to promote trade. This year, we successfully hosted the 2022 meeting between heads of Customs Administration, working group meeting, Customs Law Enforcement Cooperation Workshop under the BRICS framework, promoting practical cooperation among BRICS countries. Relevant outcomes were included in the Beijing Declaration adopted at the summit. There are 4 points I would like to make. First, we have cemented legal foundation for customs cooperation. We have encouraged BRICS countries to sign the agreement on customs cooperation and administrative mutual assistance between BRICS countries. This will provide a solid legal framework for us to carry out administratively mutual assistance, capacity building, joint law enforcement cooperation in a collective effort to ensure safe and smooth trade. Second, we have built consensus for smart cooperation. In the spirit of smart customs, smart border, and smart connectivity, we have facilitated dialogues and exchanges on infrastructure building, oversight, and smart administrative procedures. We have coordinated cross-border and cross-sector management. We have connected customs with different parts of the supply chains and harmonized rules to facilitate connectivity of industrial and supply chains. Third, we have deepened law enforcement cooperation. In the spirit of joint contribution and governance for shared benefits, we have established law enforcement contact platform and capacity building platform among BRICS countries. We have advanced cooperation on intelligence sharing and concerted efforts and actions in relevant areas. We have brought to bear smart technologies to enhance law enforcement. We have explored the use of new technologies to enhance our law enforcement capacity to combat issues such as smuggling, so as to build a BRICS customs line of defense. Fourth, we have strengthened capacity building cooperation. With the help of Xiamen BRICS Customs Training Center, we have conducted training sessions with other BRICS countries. We are preparing for a seminar on strategies to build customs capacity to enhance our cooperation on joint law enforcement and professional training. Going forward, we will continue to act on the guidelines laid out by President Xi Jinping during his speech at the 14th BRICS Summit. We will deepen comprehensive cooperation with other BRICS countries in customs and further advance our trade and economic relations and growth with other BRICS countries. We are fully confident in our ties with other BRICS countries. Thank you.
In January this year, the natural gas import through pipeline from Russia. So what are the figures for such import? And why the customs authorities do not make public such data? And also, please brief us about the trade between China and Russia following the crisis. Thank you for the question. As for the first question, thank you for your interest in such data. Since we made public data through online platforms in 2020, we do not provide the category-based data apart from the overall data, because this is to protect the lawful rights of exporters and also accommodate the needs of various parties on the data of customs. And also it is also a international customs practice, because the category-based data of gas import and export are not available in many countries. This is an international practice. And another question about the trade between China and Russia. According to our data in the first half of this year, our foreign trade with Russia registered 0.51908 trillion yuan, and our trade with Ukraine registered 35.3 billion yuan, and we will continue to make available relevant data. According to the 9th version of the COVID containment protocols, the quarantine time required for inbound travelers were cut short, which require even more effective targeted COVID response in border areas. So what are the work of the customs authorities in this regard? The customs authorities strictly implemented the decisions, followed the principle of preventing both case importation and domestic infection, and the dynamic zero-COVID policy. We have ensured strict implementation of containment protocols in border areas. After the introduction of the 9th version of containment protocols, the customs authorities followed the principle of law-based, joint, science-based, and category-specific principles. We improved the procedures for sample test, entry into cargo planes, disinfection of import goods, and closed-loop management of high-risk personnel. And we introduced the 9th version of the technical plan for COVID response in border areas. We guided customs authorities at various levels to ensure sound COVID response, prevent case importation, protect the health of travelers, and avoid unnecessary disruptions to international traffic and trade. For more specific information, I'd like to refer you to the press conference provided by my colleague, Mr. Li Zhenliang, in charge of health affairs, on July the 8th. Notably, since the outbreak of COVID-19, 2.47 million customs staff were involved in the fight against COVID-19, with 86,000 entry into the close management area each day. 3,500 staff engaged in the direct fight with COVID, and 20,000 staff are fighting at the front line. And they are using their concrete actions to live up to the great spirit of fight against COVID-19. Looking ahead, the customs authorities will continue to follow the decisions of the State Council Joint COVID Response Mechanism and strengthen relevant response measures in the border area. Thank you. Next question. CCTV. So what are the performance of agricultural exports, and what are the features of such exports? In the first half of this year, the exports for agricultural exports went up by 21%, and the exports of vegetables and mushrooms went up by 37.79 billion yuan, up by 5.5%, and the canned products went up by 55.1%. So all the major agricultural products maintained a steady growth of exports. In terms of imports, we imported 736 billion yuan, up by 5%. We imported 272.48 billion yuan of grain, up by 6.6%. Our meat import dropped by 17.4%. The agro products up by 34.1%. So that is the data for the import and export of agricultural products. Next question. The paper. We noticed remarkable performance of private-owned companies in terms of import and export, accounting for over half of our foreign trade. So what are the features of their import and export? Thank you for the question. This year, we have introduced a number of measures to improve and upgrade foreign trade and support companies, which effectively boosted the vitality of foreign exporters and importers. In the first half of this year, the number of companies with sound performance went up by 5.5%, among which privately owned companies went up by 6.9%. Their performance is better than the national average, and here are the features of those privately owned companies. First is in terms of the growth. In the first half of this year, foreign trade of private companies registered a 9.82 trillion yuan, up by 13.6%, 4.2 percentage point higher than the national average, and the share in national total grew by 1.9 percentage point to 49.6%, firmly holding on to its position as the main source of foreign trade. Second, in terms of product mix. In the first half of this year, electrical appliances export by private companies grew by 15.3%, 6.7 percentage point higher than national average. Their import of agricultural produce, domestic organic chemicals, and medical products went up by 6.4%, 14%, and 33.1% respectively, higher than the national average. Third, in terms of market share, in the first half of this year, while maintaining growth vis-à-vis traditional markets such as the United States, Europe, and Japan, private companies also sped up their exploration in emerging markets such as with ASEAN, Latin America, and the 5 Central Asian countries. Their import and export registered growth of 20.5%, 16.4%, and 53.3% respectively, higher than the national average. So, the steady growth of foreign trade in the first 6 months was largely attributable to the strong vitality of market entities. The customs authorities introduced 10 measures to stabilize and upgrade foreign trade. And recently, we introduced another 7 measures to further help companies address difficulties and lower cost. For those affected by COVID-19 and cannot pay their tax timely, yet paid the overdue within the set deadline, are exempted of overdue fines. The request for third-party examination for tax-free application of returned goods and application for import linkage tax were removed. The requirement to provide proof of warehousing for the application of fruits import licenses was removed. The requirement for the examination of imported paint was streamlined, and filing certificates were no longer required for examination. We also reduced the requirement for import of crude oil and coal. We will continue to deliver relevant policies to help companies address difficulties and ensure steady growth of foreign trade. Thank you, and let's conclude the press conference today.